Right, 11:11 in Central African time. Thank you very much for staying with us as we have just the last few minutes of the program before we wrap up. And it's wonderful to have you join us in this hour. So, poetry has always been one of Africa's most powerful forms of storytelling, giving voice to joy, struggle, resilience, and hope. Today, it continues to create space for conversations that are often very difficult to engage in. One such initiative is Kushaya monthly poetry nights for men, taking place today as you and I speak in Harare, Zimbabwe, under the theme My Brother's Keeper, Breaking the Silence of Men. Through spoken word, the event, as we understand it, is a space where it encourages honest conversations around masculinity, vulnerability, and mental well-being. So let's have this conversation. Joining me on the line is Nyasha Munashe, a member of the Kushaya community and the Visions Fellowship, alongside Kushaya is Mutsa Kajese, I beg your pardon, joining me in their capacity as founder of Kushaya. Thank you very much to the both of you for the time. Welcome to Channel Africa.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. Mutsa, I'd like to start with you. You founded Kushaya, and it sounds wholesome. It sounds necessary. It sounds relevant at this time. Just talk to us about the genesis of the space and why poetry.
Absolutely, absolutely. Just to clarify, it's Kushawa, not Kushaya. Kushawa
Kushawa, I
have
beg your
two
pardon.
very different meanings. So Kushawa was founded primarily to create a space for men, particularly of African descent, to discuss issues of masculinity and how we can redefine it within the context of being on a continent that not usually has a voice when it comes to masculinity. Masculinity, particularly in Africa, has been given primarily from a Eurocentric perspective and very limited in that case. And in the work that we do at Kushawa, we realize that a lot of men of African descent are trying to fit into a particular mold of masculinity. And when they do so, they usually struggle, create a lot of pressures, and usually resort to destructive behaviors, usually to themselves or to the people closest to them. That can often be seen in the rates of suicide that are prevalent, particularly in men, with 80% of the world's suicide being performed by men, but also with the domestic violence issues, the alcoholism, the drug abuse, and all of those destructive things that are used often as coping mechanisms to deal with those pressures because we have not been guided on how to become men in our society. We've forgotten the indigenous value systems that used to guide or transition young men to become men who could serve a community. So Kushaba Space was created specifically for that.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, give us a lesson in terms of the name thing. Kushawa. What does it mean? Because I would imagine that this
100%.
has
So
deep
so
meaning.
Kushawa actually doesn't have an English meaning definition by
Okay.
the but it's best often to be described in terms of storytelling.
Right.
So in Zimbabwe we have a very strong totem culture. So my totem is Mofu, which means eland.
Mm.
And we call ourselves Shawa as a term of endearment, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there also is the word Kushawa, and like I said, it doesn't necessarily have an English definition. But if I could take you on a journey back to how our ancestors used to live,
Mm-hmm.
we would go out and we would hunt, and we would not necessarily know how we were going to get that hunt. And keep in mind, the hunt was important to sustain the village and the community. You know, you had elderly people, you have young people, you have sickly people that need sustenance and food. So you would go out into the forest, or kupinda musango, which is to go out into the forest.
Mm-hmm.
But you weren't necessarily sure how you were going to get that hunt. You weren't necessarily sure how you were going to hunt that herd of elephants, or that herd of eland, or whatever you needed to feed.
Right.
So Kushawa was that I don't know how I'm going to do it, but it has to be done. And that's the core definition of it. It's beyond audacity when you have to do something that has to be done, but you're not really sure how you're doing it. And almost as if that will almost be figured out as you take those steps, the process will unravel itself. And so that's Kushawa. That's the real core concept of it.
Oh, I like that. And I resonate with it very deeply, going beyond
Mm-hmm,
audacity. Oh,
mm-hmm.
my goodness. That is so beautiful. Nyasha, let's talk about, you as a member of Kushawa, the community, and just the work that you do within poetry. I'm very just fascinated by perhaps your thinking around poetry going beyond just being seen as this thing for entertainment, but how this particular community is now positioning it as a tool for mental well being. Talk to us about that, and also just a little bit about your journey in poetry.
For sure. So my journey with poetry really starts with my journey in hip hop.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm primarily a rapper, but also I dabble in spoken word. But
Mm.
for me, a lot of the times when people think of hip hop, this is one of the things I spoke about earlier in the year. I hosted a show called When Hip Hop Meets Theater. When people think of hip hop, typically they think like noise and like all of these different things, substance abuse, whatnot, but they fail to see the roots of hip hop, which is very much rooted in socio-political change and just, yeah, trying to progress the community forward and all of that thing. So a lot of my work has been centered on the roots of hip hop and what that means, how it can be a progressive force for good in the world. And that's really where a lot of my poetry comes from. And I think as that relates to Kushawa and just what we're trying to with that, I think for men specifically, just dialogue on mental wellness and things of that nature, it's hard to sort of initiate that and provide a space for that. So I think poetry is a language that we all speak in many different ways. We all resonate with stories because we can see ourselves in those stories. So I think the whole initiative of having Kushawa, like specifically a poetry night, is just a way to ease men into the deeper work that we're trying to do. Me and Muta always speak very much about how a lot of the work that we're doing with Kushaya is not light work.
Mm.
It goes there. It goes to the depths. But when we go to the depths of ourselves, we're able to find and create something whole and beautiful. But it's a journey to get there.
Right, you really go there, and that is it right there. I can't even speak. I'm so enamored with this idea of men getting together and doing the difficult work, because that's exactly what it is. Really tapping into the shadows to get to the other side where the light is. Mutsa, let's talk about the space that we're currently in. Men in societies are still expected to embody certain things like strength, don't cry, have this emotional restraint. And we see that in many African cultures, on the continent. How do these cultural expectations around masculinity shape the mental challenges that men are experiencing today?
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, well, I think, in our spaces, and let me just give you some context in how we organize ourselves, because I think that's important.
Mm-hmm.
We have what we call quarterly Kushala gatherings. So every quarter we meet in a very communal based setting. We have our beers, we have our drinks, we get food together, and we just have a general conversation. Usually there's a topic around it that kind of allows us to start a particular conversation. So, for example, the last one was breaking the silence of men, the silent suffering of men, right? And then from that, we kind of get some nuggets out of those general conversations, and we have monthly sessions. And in those monthly sessions, that's where we do the real deep work. So it's either somatic work that we do, we bring in specified counselors to actually tap into the body to find out what is exactly going on. And I think to answer your question, one of the reasons why men suffer a lot is because we keep things in the head, right? So we think that we can solve everything in the head, but you can't necessarily solve the problem with the tools that created the problem itself, right? So that's why in the work of Kushaba, we encourage men to move away from the mind. That's where the ego resides, and to start focusing on the body, when we've forgotten to listen to our body because we think intuition is in a way feminine, right? We've forgotten to understand that our gut feelings, our emotions, when our body is telling us something, and how to listen to our body, how to reconnect with that, and how to reconnect with nature. Those are the tools that were given to us by our ancestors, which we used to use, right? But we've forgotten those ways because we've been told this is how you operate in society, right? So in previous generations, for a lot of reasons, the colonial agenda especially told us that to be a man, you have to adopt a certain way. And patriarchy was given to us, and we were told that this is what it means to be a man. And in a lot of ways, when we adopted that, it took away from the core foundational community based value systems, which a lot of our cultures hold, which included both the masculine and the feminine. It included the grandmother, included the grandfather, included the aunties or the tetes, is what we call them. All of those played a role in what it means to be a man. But when you isolate what it means to be a man with just men, right, and you give them particular powers in a society and say, this is what it means to lead, that is extremely, extremely harmful. And it creates a lot of pressure in men, and particularly in young boys. And I always tell people this particular quotation that says, young men will burn a village in order to feel warmth. What does that mean? It means that a lot of these young boys who are performing these destructive behaviors, all they want is to be held. But because they're told you can't express those emotions, well, then they'll express it in another way. They'll pick up a gun, or they'll burn a village, or they'll rape, or they'll pillage, or they'll do whatever it means in order to feel something. So what we're trying to do is to unravel that, to get people to stop being like this, where they feel that they are tied or they are stuck or frozen, and to slowly open up, to start receiving something different.
This is actually a divine masculine gathering. I mean, I'm realizing that more and more
Absolutely.
as we unpack this. This is so important, and I love that. In fact, we're going to take a break. I want to come back and really talk about how you are also exploring other modalities. I mean, I hardly ever hear African men talk about somatic healing, for example. I mean, that is
Right.
just absolutely refreshing. And getting out of these hegemonic forms of masculinity is there's a space for that. And as we can see, it's a fine example of what else can men do to heal their mental well-being, or take care of their mental well-being, as it were. 22 minutes into 11 a.m.
Zilipendwa na Abedi Jean de la Croix.
Tuambie ulianza lini safari yako ya muziki, tuanzie hapo hapo.
Mimi nimeanza safari yangu ya muziki ilikuwa ni mnamo mwaka wa 2019 nchini hapa Uganda, Kampala.
Ulianzia muziki wako nchini Uganda. Okay, vizuri sana. Kwa sasa wewe unapatikana nchini Uganda. Tunaambiwa kwamba unapatikana katika kambi ya wakimbizi ya Nakivale nchini Uganda. Maisha yako ya kila siku kambini yakoje?
Maisha hapa ni magumu, sio marahisi hivyo, kwa sababu kambi ya Uganda ni tofauti na kambi zingine, kwa sababu wakimbizi huwa sio wote ambao wanapata sijui kupokea. Kuna ambao wanapokea na kuna wale wa kitambo kama sisi hatunaga tena au masuala ya kupokea. So ndio maisha ni magumu sana hapa kambi. Unajuta muda kufocus sana kwenye muziki unakuwa hautoshi sana. Muda wote unakuwa na focus yote
ya muda unakuwa ni mdogo sana.
Zilipendwa kila Jumamosi kuanzia saa 12 kamili majira ya Afrika ya Kati hadi saa 1 kamili majira ya Afrika ya Kati.
Every headline has a human side. The Journal with Matseko Musito on the African Perspective.
Thank you very much for joining us and for staying with us here on Channel Africa as we broadcast live via satellite. In Southern Africa, it's channel 802 on the DSTV audio bouquet. Joining us on the line is Nyasha as well as Mutsa, who are, just working on this wholesome space for men to express themselves through the spoken word and other wonderful modalities, as we found out. And this is Kushaya as we unpack it right here on the program. Nyasha, I want to get perspectives from you in terms of perhaps what you've seen the space create for men. Have you been able to witness moments where, poetry or the spoken word, as it were, has changed someone's perspective, or been able to give them the courage to speak about their struggles?
Yeah, for sure. I think as I've been a performing artist for the past 6 years, I've seen various things, various communities, just like, I think particularly just the use of spoken word, because a lot of it has roots in like rhythm, and men typically tend to respond to that more than just a dialogue. But I think it's small things like that that sort of initiate a conversation where it's like, oh, I can feel these things. I am allowed to feel these things. And I think, especially in terms of like the Kushaya gatherings, like it's very interesting to note how men come in at the start of the gathering and the sort of progression that we go through, and how men are typically a lot more expanded as we go through the gathering. I think we do a lot of somatic exercises, And particularly this past week, we had a monthly gathering, and it's I can't remember the name of the exercise you had us do at the start, but essentially had to communicate a story with our bodies. So we had one partner essentially giving a directive to the other to tell the story with their body, and it involved like a lot of physical touch, which typically men are very uncomfortable with. But as we got on and we started just pushing the boundaries of what it is that we're comfortable with, we started to see men go from this to slowly start to do this.
Hmm.
So I think, yeah, just initiating those conversations and like creating that safe space, knowing that as we create more and more of that space, there's more room for expansion. There's a cost to getting there, of course, but
Yeah.
the fruit that you reap from it is wonderful. So I think that's been my main reflections from that.
This is just incredible. Muta, I need to get perspective from you. I mean, how do you even get men to come to the circle? Because I mean, when I hear somatic healing, obviously it's a very big, Greek word, but it's about the connection between the mind and the body, and it explores so many things like breath work and yoga and tai chi and all those wonderful themes. That can be very hard if I've been taught to just be quiet, to be emotionally resilient as a man, to do the hard labor, and to stay away from vulnerability, as far away from vulnerability as I possibly can. How do you even get the
Right.
men to come into the circle and explore those themes and still maintain their strength in their masculinity?
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think for context, I think like I mentioned in the beginning, masculinity has been given kind of a limited definition, and what we're
Mm-hmm.
trying to do is to kind of broaden its perspective to say actually it can be so much more. There's a spectrum to masculinity that people don't know.
Right.
So in order to bring people in, especially men of African descent, we don't use words like somatic,
No.
right? But what I'll come with a drum, right?
Mm.
Or we stomp our feet, right? Because now, you like Nyasha mentioned, the concept of rhythm automatically involves the body, right? So when you stomp our feet to a rhythm, or we clap our hands together, or we sing together, that is somatic, right? We have within our culture
Right.
what the West is now calling somatic healing. That's always been within our cultures.
Mm.
It's just there's an essence of remembering and a reconnection that we do here. This is not anything new. We're not presenting something new,
Mm.
right? It has maybe different words or different names to it, but we are actually reconnecting with ancestry, what's already within our bones.
Mm.
Part of the core messages of Kushaba is we are remembering the memories that need to be reactivated within our bones, right? So again, it can't be a cerebral thing. But if we bring a drum beat to it, men will immediately start moving. When we huddle together and we're touching each other, right, in a certain way, there's an element of trust because a lot of men are afraid of the tactile component,
Mm.
right? But in a circle of trust, which we do it after every session, we huddle together and we say, all right, speak your truth. And whoever needs to speak their truth, come into the circle, look your brothers in the eye,
Mm.
tap on your chest. That's somatic, right? So it's also playing with the language a little bit so that to get people comfortable and not to feel that people are too much out of their depth. Because when you do use language like somatic, people will be like, "Oh, what's that?" Okay, I'm a little bit afraid of it. But if I come with the drum and start beating it and say, "Okay, let's stomp our feet together. Let's do a war cry," all of a sudden, it's something that can resonate with them.
Okay. Sounds absolutely wonderful. Okay, as we wrap up the conversation, I want to get a sense of how you've curated the space for men to join. I mean, are you open for new people to come through and share these expressions and perhaps share ideas with you and what could be done further, or how exactly does it work?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. You want to go, Nyasha?
no, I was saying I'll let Musa take that one.
Okay, all right. Okay, so for this, yeah, we're very open, and we're by no means are we saying that we own the definition to masculinity,
Mm-hmm.
but what we are saying is that we're willing to compost various ideas of what masculinity is. It's not just necessarily just from a heterosexual perspective. There's different orientations, different backgrounds, different faiths that we have to consider as well. That's number one. How we do it is we have a very low barrier to entry. To become a member, all you have to do is to join our WhatsApp group. We'll be happy to share those details with you. Right. When you join the WhatsApp group, we do have rolling conversations that are happening. We do also have some professionals within that group that can assist us, that can assist you. And if you need to have private conversations, that's also available. And then we have the quarterly gatherings that happen primarily in Harare at the moment. But the next step is to move to Johannesburg to open up and work with some organizations that are already doing men's work, because we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. So I've been speaking to a number of organizations within the Johannesburg area. We're going to link up with them so that Kushaya can then start taking shape across the continent. The goal is to get men of African descent and different backgrounds talking to each other to say, what are the various modalities that your culture uses? What do the Yoruba do in Nigeria? What do the Dagara people do in Burkina Faso? What do the Maasai do in Kenya? And kind of start to see what are the similarities, but what are the differences? And of course, what are the learnings that we can get from each other?
That sounds wonderful. Okay, so if you are going to be in Harare, just by the way, you're able to get into the city. Friendship Bench Hub is hosting Kushaya today. I see that Mofu Yamvura is going to be hosting tonight's gathering. So we're going to share the WhatsApp details with you on our social media pages. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you for the time and all the best going forward. I think this is absolutely amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nyasha and Mutsa of Kushaya joining us on the line. It is 11:32. Fikile Lengwati standing by with the latest sports.
Sports on